Good evening, everybody. This is Ryan Thomas of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, back on the Thomas Take live on Spreaker.com, YouTube.com/Thomas Take Sports Podcast, bringing you the latest edition of the Thomas Take, and very excited to get off to another fresh start on the Thomas Take. It's been about a week since I got on the live airwaves on Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, you name it. It's on there. Facebook, you name it. So wanted to hop on here to kind of talk about something that caught my attention. As everybody knows, I'm a huge Buffalo Bills fan, Buffalo Bills writer for the Huddle magazine, which is a key feature in the Rochester Sports Network, rocksportsnetwork.com. Go to the website, check it out. Read the articles, my interesting take on the wide receiver position battle in training camp, which has a new addition with Anquan Boldin. My take on that, very excited. Great to have a guy like Anquan Boldin in the locker room for the Buffalo Bills, a guy that can teach Zay Jones, Sammy Watkins, Andre Holmes, quite possibly, maybe not. More on that a little bit later. What he could do, to revitalize a locker room. Walter Payton Man of the Year award winner. A guy that has just been a consummate professional since his beginning days in the NFL, really. At virtually every stop, he's widely talked about as being a character guy. So, let's talk about somebody in the Buffalo Bills past that is clearly not a character guy. And that is former Buffalo Bills quarterback Rob Johnson, who today made some short-sighted, disparaging comments towards former Buffalo Bills quarterback Doug Flutie and former teammate Doug Flutie. And it's widely known that in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a quarterback battle between Rob Johnson and Doug Flutie that took place, in which Rob Johnson was acquired via trade from the Jacksonville Jaguars after being a stellar backup for the Jacksonville Jaguars due to a Mark Brunell injury. And Mark Brunell was the face of the Jaguars at the time, along with Fred Taylor. And Rob Johnson played pretty well in a couple backup quarterback, games, leading in a couple games as the backup quarterback, as the starting quarterback in the wake of this injury, I should say, leaving the door open for teams to kind of, see what they could get out of him. And Buffalo was the team that really wanted Rob Johnson. So Buffalo made a trade. I believe it was a second and a fourth-round pick for Rob Johnson, and Buffalo immediately signed Johnson to a 5-year, $25 million contract. Now, today, that is, pedestrian, but actually that's underpaid considering the average salary for an NFL quarterback is around $8 to $10 million right now. At the lowest, I should say. And given that is the case now, then that was thought to be a huge risk by the Buffalo Bills. But Buffalo reassured the fans that they would have a backup plan. They went out and signed Doug Flutie from the Toronto Argonauts of the CFL, Grey Cup champion, former NFL quarterback that most had thought was an NFL bust. They signed Doug Flutie to a $300,000 contract, which is basically a highly, that's like a president's salary. But for the NFL, that is the lowest contract that I've ever heard that someone has worked a year as a starting quarterback under. So Flutie accepts, he takes the offer, shows that he's learned some things in training camp, shows that he's a different type of quarterback, a different type of player than what most NFL executives, what most scouts thought he was. Maybe the fact was that the CFL helped Doug Flutie. That's something that is said a lot among league writers and league scouts, and I would have to agree. The fact that it's a 3-down league, he was throwing more, he was running from the pocket, he became more of an elusive player than he ever was before. And he was always an elusive player, dating back to his days at Boston College. So Flutie shows up in training camp. Johnson's still the starter. Johnson, I believe, in week 3 or week 2, maybe even week 4. Johnson is injured. Flutie comes in, and the rest was history. Flutie leads the Bills to the playoffs. They play in the AFC wildcard game that year, and the Bills inexplicably bench Doug Flutie for Rob Johnson. Rob Johnson, in fairness, does win the Bills the game, 16-15, but the Bills forgot to cover on a highly questionable kickoff return for a touchdown. So that was the story. That's what happened then. This is what happened today. Rob Johnson, on a radio show, I believe in California, stated his opinion on when the Bills signed Doug Flutie. He considered it to be a joke of a signing. He never thought that Flutie was a threat to his job or anything like that. Referred to Flutie as, maybe quite possibly getting the shot due to the story that Doug Flutie kind of had throughout his career of being a short quarterback that was scoffed at due to his height rather than his playing ability, and a quarterback that had a good story being that his son had some sort of, Down syndrome, disease. He was diagnosed with Down syndrome from birth. That was a really just disparaging, highly offensive remark that Rob Johnson made. My question is, what does Rob Johnson have to be mad about? If you go back and retrace the steps of the history that I just alluded, the Bills benched Doug Flutie after he led them to a playoff season, after Rob Johnson had been hurt. The Bills didn't owe Rob Johnson anything. Bills owner Ralph Wilson said, hey, I want you guys to start Rob Johnson. Rob Johnson is the 5-year, $25 million investment that I made, and I want to see what he can do. Plus, week 17, Rob Johnson played a real big game at home in Buffalo, and I think the Bills won 31-3. Game that they just completely routed the team, and Rob Johnson had over 5 touchdown. He actually had, not 5, he had 4 touchdown passes and was benched late in the game because of the day that he had. They didn't want a chance getting him hurt. When they pulled him, put in their third stringer, I believe Alex Van Pelt at the time, that's when Doug Flutie realized, hey, I could quite possibly be getting benched next week if they're trying to preserve Rob Johnson for next week. And it could have been because of the fact that Flutie was coming off an injury too, but Flutie was relatively healthy going into that game, and they decided to start Rob Johnson anyway. He was healthy going into the week 17 game. He was healthy going into the playoff game, and they went with Rob Johnson. The Music City Miracle happened. We all know that. We all have seen it. We can replay it in our head 1,000 times. But after that, Doug Flutie parted ways with the Bills. John Butler parted ways with the Bills GM. Wade Phillips was fired by owner Ralph Wilson due to the fact that Ralph Wilson wanted Wade Phillips to fire then special teams coach Bruce DeHaven, the late great Bruce DeHaven, one of the best special teams coaches in NFL history. Regardless of that play, was a key main contributor to the resume in which Steve Tasker was able to put together. Bruce DeHaven was the special teams coach for the 4 straight Super Bowl teams. And special teams is a huge key factor in those Super Bowl teams. So, all that being said, this was Ralph Wilson's call. Ralph Wilson wanted Rob Johnson in, didn't want Doug Flutie in because he didn't see the longevity in Doug Flutie. And it turned out that Doug Flutie had a much longer career in the NFL than that of Rob Johnson. Doug Flutie ended up being Tom Brady's backup in his last NFL years. So, also being a key influential piece in Drew Brees' career as a youngster, when Drew Brees was a youngster coming out of Purdue. with the San Diego Chargers. Marcellus Wiley, the well-known guy on Sports Nation, goes from Buffalo to the Chargers. Steve Christie, the comeback kick, guy that kicked the comeback kick, goes from the Bills to the Chargers. They were the Bills of the West. So what is Rob Johnson complaining about? Why would Rob Johnson feel the need to put these disparaging, ignorant, classless, pathetic statements out when he sounds as if he's trying to create an alternate reality in which he was taken away of the starting job when he should have never been taken away the starting job, and Flutie didn't deserve it. And it's like, well, you got your job back and you didn't do much else after that, which is why you became a backup. Then you became a third stringer, and then you became out of the league. All while Doug Flutie was still playing in the NFL as a starter in San Diego and as a backup in New England. Two coaches, Marty Schottenheimer, Bill Belichick, thought enough of Doug Flutie to be a backup. So, and slash starter in San Diego. So, whatever alternate reality that Rob Johnson feels as if he needs to convince himself that Flutie was gifted the job, that is some of the dumbest crap I have ever heard. And the fact that it's been almost 20 years and Rob Johnson is still talking about this is pretty pathetic, to say the least. He should be ashamed of himself. He really should be ashamed of himself. He was such a bust as a quarterback in Buffalo that Buffalo had to then do what they did in getting Rob Johnson yet again, in getting Drew Bledsoe. They had to go out, make a trade with a division rival, take Drew Bledsoe off the Patriots' hands, and start over. And we know that didn't last long either. This guy is saying that, the commercials had me as Spicoli from Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and Doug Flutie has a little voice. It's like, are you obsessed with Doug Flutie still? Are you obsessed with the fact that more people appreciated Doug Flutie because he played his ass off compared to a 6'4", 240-pound quarterback with rubber bands for ankles, and Rob Johnson? Actually, 240. What am I talking? He was like 210. 6'5", 210. The dude was a string bean. Couldn't last an entire season in the NFL, and that's why he was never a starting quarterback. I was a kid at this point. I was, 8 or 9 at this point, and I even remember that. I mean, and he's in his 40s and his 50s, probably. So why is he still making these remarks? Why is he still talking about it? Let's move on. Move on, coach. Do what you got to do. But his legacy is the fact that he lost his starting job to Doug Flutie. And everyone and their grandmother knows that Doug Flutie should have never been benched in that playoff game, regardless of whether or not Rob Johnson had that game in the bag, 16-15, game-winning drive with one shoe on his foot. His other shoe was completely gone, tossed to the sideline so he could continue the drive. Heroic stuff. Don't sell yourself short of that by talking about the fact that you think Doug Flutie only got the starting quarterback job because he had a son with Down syndrome. That really shocked me. To read that, to see that, I thought, what's this? I click and wow. Rob Johnson, shame on you, man. Shame on you.